Imagine a world where humanity pursued unity over division. Imagine a world where humanity acknowledged the oneness of everything in the universe. Imagine a world where humanity chose love and light over everything else. It's Not My Credit to Take explores the stories of people from all walks of life who seek to uplift humanity and restore Christ consciousness on this planet. Their unique journeys of tapping into their gifts, talents, and the infinite consciousness are amazing, and their willingness to share them to wake up humanity to their true essence and potential is even more remarkable. Get ready to laugh, to cry, and to be inspired. I'm your host, Dr. Ed Slover, and welcome to the It's Not My Credit to Take podcast. Hey there, Sandy. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for taking time to have this conversation. My guest today is Sandy Smith. Sandy is a global life strategist who helps men experience magnetic masculinity. She's a neurodivergent and has a wide range of skill sets in self-help and spirituality. Sandy has studied and been certified in dozens of modalities over the decades, and her mission is to help humanity evolve out of the emotional dark ages. As the founder of the Magnetic Masculinity movement, she wants to help 1 million men that are ready to redefine what it means to be a man, to find authentic alignment, fulfilling relationships, become trigger proof, create clarity and emotional mastery to experience fulfilling lives. Whether someone is seeking a shift in mindset, coping with change, or navigating the complexities of life, Sandy approaches each situation with confidence, clarity, and compassion, both for herself and for others. Sandy, welcome to the It's Not My Credit to Take podcast.
Thank you so much. It's really
So
great to be here.
it's good to see you. We had an instant connection whenever we had our introductory phone call, and I've really been looking forward to this chat ever since.
I have as well. It was really good.
So why don't you share with the listeners a little bit more about you and how you ended up where you are in your life?
Sure. Well, you did a great job introducing me. And yeah, that's one of the many things I do. I am neurodivergent. I have ADHD and what was formerly called Asperger's, which is the same type of autism that Elon Musk has. And so instead of some of the more common or typical special interests of those neurodivergent brothers and sisters of mine, my special interest since I was a child was human behavior. And growing up with a lot of sort of pain and trauma and bullying and never being able to fit in, I used my sort of gifted mind to figure out what was wrong and how to fix it so that we could all start having more fun together and connect more.
So talk a little bit about how you overcame some of the challenges that you just referenced with respect to bullying and the trauma associated with that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that it's not my credit to take, oddly enough, because I was blessed to have a lot of guidance along the way. And also because I spent so much time by myself, it gave me I've always been a very inquisitive, curious, self-reflective, and observational person. So that combined with the fact that I was born remembering my pre-incarnation, and I was born sort of aware of different models of perceiving reality than were typically at that time practiced. So I had sort of a meta view, I suppose, of reality. And that combined with, so I was doing university level physics in grade 4, but I never learned any of it. It was just stuff I knew that wasn't mine to take credit for. I just knew stuff. Or I would get suggestions and guidance along the way of like, I remember one instance when I was in school in grade 2 or 3, and I remember just always having this feeling of like, I have stuff to do. I'm here for a reason. I came here. I'm not here that long. I have stuff to do. I don't have time for this or that. And I remember these voices just sort of soothing me and saying, it's okay, just relax, embrace the human experience, study everybody around you, have compassion, take some deep breaths. So I had sort of intuitively learned breath work and meditation without understanding what any of those words were from a young age. And also, to be honest, I think more than anything, I've always had a desire to be happy and have fun. So if something in my life is preventing me from that, I guess I'm intrinsically incentivized to figure it out so that I can get back to enjoying myself and having more fun.
That's really interesting. I want to touch on a number of things that you said there. The first of which is remembering your pre incarnation. What did you actually remember?
Well, it's a little bit unclear. What I mean by that is, have you ever had an experience where you wake up from a dream and you're like, whoa, that dream was so intense, and you remember bits and pieces of it, but it's not necessarily completely clear and congruent?
Yeah.
It was sort of like that. So I think I was born just a little bit unplugged from the matrix, or a little bit, some of my human filters were a little bit blown. Um, and I just sort of had this awareness always of like, well, this is not it. Like, I knew intrinsically that this was the secondary experience, not my baseline. And I remembered speaking telepathically. I remembered different, what we might refer to as vibrations. And I think that's why I became so interested in physics and philosophy and things where I was trying to. I grew up with a lot of scientists in my family, brilliant scientists, thought leaders, game changers, and I was trying to figure out how I could walk in both worlds, I guess. And yeah, I just was acutely aware that this is not it, and that our soul, if we want to refer to it as that, does not die when our avatar or our earth suit, or what I call the vehicle of consciousness, expires. Yeah.
That's really, really interesting. You had also mentioned that you had different models of perceiving reality. What did that look like for you? What did those models consist of?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. That's a good one. So I was always curious about looking at something like a Newtonian paradigm or a cause and effect paradigm, and trying to fit it into a larger view of how reality could work. And I just sort of, again, understood things that to me seemed like common sense, that I thought everybody knew about how the world worked or how the universe worked, and how and why incarnation worked, and things like that, that quite honestly I assumed everybody else knew. But then I realized at some point in my life that I was probably, well, partially that did not help me fit in necessarily so much in school, because I just didn't care about the things that the other kids cared about. I thought it was boring, and I was like, let's talk about what happens when you die. What is your theory of consciousness? Like, I talked about things that the other kids were like, do you have any Barbies? And I was like, don't you care about a theory of everything? Come on, why are we here? Sort of thing.
I was going to ask you about that right when you said you had a level of understanding that was common sense to you and
Mhm.
somewhat elusive, maybe completely elusive to everyone else your age.
Yeah.
As you grew up, how did that level of understanding affect your relationships with other people?
Well, that's a great question. You're great at asking questions. I like them. I think that made me not fit in, so to speak. And we know that love and belonging is the number one biological, scientifically inarguable need of the human species. And often, because we're living in the emotional dark ages, we confuse fitting in with love and belonging. So that was a reason I did not fit in. Being neurodivergent was another reason I didn't fit in. So it so I learned to fit in, or often what they call in neurodivergent studies, mask. So I figured out what behaviors would and would not be helpful to others, because I also realized at some point, as I kept growing, I realized other people don't know this stuff. So maybe I'm crazy, because I would ask my teachers about things, or I would ask people about things, And they would look at me like I was crazy, which is completely understandable. I totally get it. And I don't think people necessarily should believe something they haven't experienced. So now I get it in retrospect. But at the time, I at one point decided that I just must be wrong. Because why would all these brilliant scholars that I know, why would teachers, why would other people think that this was nonsense? And then later in life, I also realized, in a way, it was like mutual gaslighting, because I was basically telling people everything you believe about reality is not true. That's not super helpful. And to me, the way they were explaining things sort of just naturally, I guess, inadvertently gaslit me about how I perceived reality.
You've referenced the term neurodivergent several times.
Mm.
For listeners who don't know exactly what that is, how would you describe that?
So, neurodivergent is a blanket term that they now use to describe we're increasing in awareness, the ever growing number of humans in society that fall somewhere on what is also referred to as the spectrum: ADD, ADHD, high functioning autism, or Asperger's, the type that, like, Elon Musk, Albert Einstein, a lot of thought leaders, game changers have, a lot of CEOs and executives are, and entrepreneurs and inventors are on the part of the spectrum of ADD, ADHD, right up to a high support needs autism, is all categorized now under neurodivergence. Means we think a little bit different. And I actually have some theories about that might have been the precondition to me experiencing different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum than a lot of people can perceive at this time in evolution. Because I think it's a compensatory strategy of the human body that other organs in the body also employ if we have some sort of barrier or blockage, which is that it kind of goes around or creates different pathways. So I suspect we're accessing different parts of our brain than might typically being accessed at this point in evolution. So we might be a little more psychic, a little more intuitive, empaths. A lot of people call them star seeds, or they're, at the end of the day, they're all metaphors. They're just words that don't mean anything unless we agree on the meaning. So neurodivergence is just this sort of collective term for any of those type of old labels.
I like that you said that, because I've often said that we communicate in definitions, and if we don't share the same definitions, that is the recipe for misunderstanding, right? It's
I
just
agree with you.
baked into the cake. I want to back up just a second, because you had
Mhm.
referenced the emotional dark ages, that we're
Mm.
living in the emotional dark
Mhm.
ages. What does that mean to you? How would you describe that?
Okay. So to me, that means that we look back when we learn about, I don't know, cavemen or whatever the historical populations, we look at them like, oh, that was the dark ages. Like, they just didn't know. And I think it's healthier to approach things. I mean, there's value in that, to focus on our progress for sure. But I also think that there's value in looking at ourselves and saying, in what are we blind to right now? In what ways are we still in the dark ages? So focus on our progress, but also make that presupposition that we're not there yet, clearly. And I call it the emotional dark ages because, like I referenced earlier, love and belonging is the number one biological, neurological, scientifically inarguable need of the human species. Unfortunately, we confuse fitting in with love and belonging. And a lot of us, now, I would like to acknowledge that I am speaking with a bit of a North American bias, so I can't speak for all of humanity. That's just my experience. And different cultures have slightly different variations. But we have historically tried to fit in or become better or compete or whatever strategies we had, which are actually barriers to love and belonging. And we've had to abandon, deny, reject, or disassociate from a lot of our own authenticity in order to fit in. So that love and belonging, that is the number one cellular need of the human species that drives us to connection, needs to begin within the parts of ourselves. And we're often we're taught a lot of things, but we're not as frequently taught the very skills that are the fundamental need of the human species, of love and belonging. So that requires this sort of understanding of the full spectrum of emotions. And again, I call this our vehicle of consciousness. Emotions are our navigation system. And we've been sort of practicing things like not feeling our emotions, not understanding others' emotions. So I think that this huge evolutionary leap we're making in humanity right now, one of the most helpful ways that we can accelerate that expansion and that growth and become more like Buddha, Christ, any of the leaders and spiritual teachers that came to help us be more like them and walk alongside them, is understanding our emotions, the emotions of others, and developing the tools for love and belonging. Because loneliness would be, if love and belonging is the number one need of the human species, loneliness would be the absence of it, which is why loneliness is the most excruciating experience that a human can have. Well, I don't know, I can't speak that broadly, but I think we could all agree that that sort of existential loneliness, and that's often actually not only the inability to connect with others emotionally, because we are emotional beings, but also that disconnection from the parts of ourselves that we had to disidentify from or become blind to in order to fit in, because we confuse that with love and belonging because we're living in the emotional dark ages. Or, you know what, let's reframe that. We are currently very well evolving out of the emotional dark ages.
You're so right. So many things I was thinking about during what you just said there. We either suppress or repress emotions, consciously or subconsciously, and that all gets tamped down in the pursuit of approval.
Yes.
Why do you think we've gotten that confused with love? Because it occurs to me, and this is relatively recent development, it occurs to me that the seeking of approval is largely externalized,
Mm-hmm.
and it's rife for disconnection to happen. And
Mm-hmm.
anything that disconnects us from love is the absence of love. And God, the universe, source, all of it is, in fact, love.
Love is the fabric of consciousness.
Why do you think we've just haven't figured that out yet?
That's such a good question. I think we are in the process of figuring it out. And I think that we started in in a state of very high entropy and separation. And maybe the journey is coming back together. So maybe the purpose was to start with the absence of it so that we could experience that hero's journey or that evolutionary expansion back into connection and out of separation. And some of the theories that were explained to me by that which explains things to me is that source itself, when it was a singularity, couldn't really understand itself. And in order to be able to perceive itself, understand itself, grow, or experience anything other than nothingness and neutrality, it itself needed to separate and look at itself from different angles. So and I think it makes sense to me logically that if this is a fractal or holographic universe, that what happens on the macro happens on the micro. So if you currently experiencing yourself as Ed and myself currently experiencing myself as Sandy are different perspectives of source, then you and I within us would have to have different perspectives. So the different parts of our personality that are getting to know each other, but right now again we have not been celebrating authenticity and self-awareness and authentic alignment and those things in society because, like you said, we've been confused between fitting in and love and belonging. So one of the answers to that is to get to know and learn and understand the different parts of ourselves, which will help us understand the parts of each other similar to when we do what is referred to as shadow work, where we find compassion for our less evolved parts. We own our awesome, we own our slightly more obnoxious coping mechanisms, and then we start to recognize them instead of becoming triggered by them in others, which is helping us come back into connection and understanding that unity context, whilst also being able to acknowledge our unique divinity, or the fact that we are all meant to be unique, one-of-a-kind perspectives of source consciousness. We're not meant to be the same. There's no duplicates, there's no redundancies. Source itself is becoming self-aware, potentially, if that model or conjecture is correct, which I have no way to prove or disprove it. So it's only a theory, and if it's helpful, great, and if it's not, great.
As far as I can tell, that's exactly what's happening. Like, you and I are uniquely different expressions of the same source. Right?
Yes.
Different drops in the sea of consciousness, different
Yes.
pieces of the cosmic puzzle.
Yes.
For someone who can't necessarily wrap their mind around that idea, and or for the individual that is trapped in religion, and I don't want to denigrate religion, because religion is absolutely an arrow to source, but for those who are sort of confined by the rules and strictures of it, what's the practical value of knowing that we are uniquely different expressions of source consciousness, and within that we provide contrast to source to better know itself?
I think the benefit of exploring a different thought model is that it gives us permission to become that which many religious sectors have created an expectation that we be like. Okay, wait, that wasn't very clear. So instead of needing to feel like we have to be good, like we have to be perfect, like we have to be pious, like we have to be whatever we have to be, it's sort of transitioning from appearing like into being. Because by celebrating our divinity, celebrating our uniqueness, claiming our power, owning our awesome, owning our stuff, then we actually become more Christ-like, or we become more like whatever your particular religious ideal is, rather than trying to fit in and become blind to the ways that we are not like that. So I think it gives us it helps us become more authentic, which creates a more inhospitable environment for shame, which is the cause of the maladaptive coping mechanisms that we're now fearing and judging, and therefore becoming blind to in ourselves in order to fit in with the ideologies of whatever particular religion that we're aligning with. Does that answer your question or no?
It does, and it strikes me as ironic that the thing that is designed, at least on paper, to
Yeah,
unite people within religions has served as the impetus for arguably the most human death in the history of the world, in
absolutely.
quote the name of God.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. And I think that, again, whenever these teachers brought information to us, we just weren't very evolved yet. So we took that information through our own biases and filters and confusion of fitting in with love and belonging, and applied those tools in a way that we're now recognizing is maybe not optimal. And again, if we teach people sex is bad, wanting things is bad, you have to be the same, think the same, dress the same, talk the same, act the same, wear the same, and we don't celebrate that the divinity of our unique expressions of source, then it causes, again, more of that separation within the parts of ourselves, the parts that we become ashamed to look at. And then they go to the subconscious. And then I tell people, if we're not aware of what our parts are and what our authentic needs are, and we're not finding healthy ways to meet our needs because of what we've been taught through outdated understandings of spiritual teachings, then what happens is we have all these little parts in our subconscious that are not getting their needs met, and they do that hostile takeover of the talking stick from the subconscious. They do that hostile takeover. We kind of go unconscious, and they facilitate our less adorable behaviors that we're not willing to look at because we're so paralyzed trying to fit in, and depriving humans of some of their core needs and authenticity, although perhaps well-meaning at the time, like you said, we can recognize is not working. So it's time to evolve out of the emotional dark ages and maybe apply some of these teachings in a different way so that we're being more like that rather than trying to fit into that, whatever that is, in order to avoid the shame of being different.
And what you were talking about there was social programming that
Mm-hmm.
we're all subject to from the time we were born. And I'm
Yeah.
glad you said well meaning, well intended people. Our parents,
Yes.
our teachers, our coaches, the adults in
Yes,
our life growing up, they were well meaning and well intended.
they
I
were.
actually wrote a blog on this week on being trapped until you're not. And
I like that.
it was around certain topics like the debt slavery and how the financial system in the U.S. is set up to keep us enslaved in debt. But
You
one of
should
the
do a
other,
podcast with my husband. That's his special interest, and he's brilliant at all of that.
yeah, I don't, I'm positive I couldn't keep up with him on that topic. I know enough to be dangerously wrong on a lot of those areas, but
You're
social,
self-aware of it.
right, social programming was one of the other uh,
Yeah.
topics within that. And I wanted to ask you, is the goal for us as we evolve our respective consciousness, is the goal as a starting point to get to the other side of that with clarity and compassion, or is the goal to maybe stop the negative momentum in our lives first before we actually move forward, before we add something to our lives? Would it be more beneficial from your perspective to delete or remove something first?
Hmm. Again, that's a really good question. I think I think possibly it can be helpful to do some of the healing work first, because I often say, in fact, I did a TikTok video today about it, about how it's often the energy or intention behind the action we take. So if we're taking an action like whatever, meditating, whatever we're doing, coaching, therapy, if we're doing it from a place of I'm not good enough, I have to evolve, I have to fit in, I'm not spiritual enough, I don't have enough crystal bracelets, I can't do a double lotus, I can't do this, I'm not good enough. If we're taking action from shame, then we're adding momentum to the collective consciousness. So I feel that what I call okay, I didn't invent self-compassion, to be fair. I call it self-compassion. I don't know if you've heard of it. No, I'm just kidding. What I believe is what I call radical compassion, which is kind of like you said, is that in a different way. And radical compassion is that compassion for ourselves that we were impacted, and acknowledging and witnessing and presencing that pain so that it can heal. And then extending and finding that love and compassion and extending it out for compassion for those who impacted us with their unskillfulness while they did their best. And then compassion for those that we have impacted with our unskillfulness. and finding that radical compassion and then taking any action step from that baseline of recognizing the divinity in everybody else, even if their behaviors are suboptimal. And that's why I like what people often call shadow work so much, is looking at those parts in us that are less evolved and finding compassion for them. And then when we recognize those behaviors in others, we don't allow it to impact us. It doesn't mean we tolerate abusive behavior. I'm definitely not condoning that. But we can recognize it for what it is, which is a cry for help or darkness that has not had the opportunity to have light shined on it, or a consequence of that social programming that that was part of the emotional dark ages.
You said something I had never heard just then. Presencing the pain.
Mm.
Right when you said that, I thought about the 13-year-old version of me who dealt with my father passing away. He was 39 when he shed his costume, and
Oof.
as you might expect, that was fairly traumatic, and I didn't
Very
realize
traumatic.
that at the time. But a young boy entering formative years, and it's taken probably the better part of the last 3 or 4 years for me to demonstrate a willingness to turn around and go put my arm around that 13-year-old version of myself and give him a hug and said, I love you. Thank you so much for coping how you coped, but you
Yeah.
can't come with me anymore. It's time for me to hold you up.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, like with the people that
Good for you.
you've worked with, thank you. The people that you've worked with, how do you teach compassion? Especially if the default setting is guilt or shame.
Mm. Well, first of all, I would like to honor the strength and power and confidence and clarity that it took for you to do that, especially growing up in the divine masculine programming, where we've essentially cut men's emotional legs off in childhood, not teaching them the skills that they need for love and belonging for the parts of themselves, and therefore the projection or reflection of that in the external reality. And I celebrate every man who's willing to learn those skills and start to develop some of those tools and skills that are not their fault that they don't have. And as we heal out of the conditioned masculinity into what I call magnetic masculinity, it does involve exactly what you said, learning. It's learning new skills, it's practicing. And I think that the pain has gotten so strong in the collective. And again, I accept anybody on any part of any gender spectrum. It's just that I have focused my efforts on helping the divine masculine heal and redefine masculinity, because that's what I feel called to do. And I really enjoy it and I'm good at it. So it sort of depends on the unique individual and where they're at. But over the years, I've come up with sort of like a set of protocols and tools and practical applications and a perfectly thought out steps that help. They really could help anybody, but in this case, help men learn some of those tools for self-compassion, because the compassion has to start with self and understanding themselves and finding. I use very logical models for things that help the left brain feel safe to step into some of those tools, and then teaching them about emotions and teaching them about what I call piloting their vehicle of consciousness, which again, this is our vehicle of consciousness. And I teach them that the brain is your supercomputer. And it's just easy to relate something to a car because I really like cars. I've always been a big fan. I like sports cars. I just really like cars. So it's a metaphor that resonates to me and that I think everybody can at least relate to, because most people have driven or been in or seen a car. So your brain is the supercomputer, and the computer needs to be running efficiently for everything else to run. It's sort of like the motherboard. And that computer, most of the software or conditioning you mentioned, most of the software was installed before the age of 7. So it can be very empowering to learn the tools to reprogram any software that's no longer serving us, give some software a little bit of an OS update, and also celebrate or acknowledge what software is running. And we can learn to train our brain so that we can install software, neural pathways that run as automatically as our old programs once did that no longer serve us. Then the other component is the body, and the body is the engine, and it needs to be properly maintained, because it can either we can get a long life out of it, or it can burn out and malfunction and overheat very early, depending on the quality of fuel that we're putting in it, how much gas we have in the tank, how we're taking care of it. And we want to keep that gas tank full. We want to identify what things are draining the gas tank and what things are filling my gas tank. But even if the computer is running and we've got a full tank of gas and a well-maintained engine, we still need the battery, and the heart is the battery. And we need to help men, support men together in society, support each other in reconnecting and getting that battery charge. That's also where the intuition comes in. And we can really empower men to connect to the power of their intuition. But even if we have a fully charged battery, a full tank of gas, and we're programming our software effectively, emotions are your navigation system. And they guide us towards our authentic alignment and away from our conditioning and our self-concept. So it's very important to learn to tune into our emotions and understand the valuable information they have about our authentic wants, needs, boundaries, and values, as well as the roadmap to where our wounds are and where we can apply healing. So using simple models like that empowers us to be able to quickly diagnose and repair if something isn't feeling good. Or like a lot of men tell me, I work with a lot of high performers, so they've checked the boxes. They're like, check, money, check, family, check, education, check, $1 million, check, boat, check, whatever. But it's helping bridge that gap between achievement and fulfillment. And when we're in authentic alignment and piloting our vehicle of consciousness effectively, then they step into what I call magnetic masculinity, which is confidence, clarity, self-awareness, authenticity, vulnerability, emotional mastery. And then they're energized, they're inspired, they're inspiring to others. And a lot of these people that are out there, making big impact in the world. And so teaching them these practical ways to heal out of the emotional dark ages, I just think is really fun.
That's so good. It got me thinking, as you work with men and as they evolve into magnetic masculinity, is a natural byproduct of that showing up differently for themselves that allows them to show up differently for those people that come into their world? Because the reason I ask it that way is there's so much fear within men today of actually showing up authentically and that authenticity being misunderstood. And as a
Mhm.
consequence of that misunderstanding, it could lead to being canceled.
Yeah.
So, is that a natural byproduct? Like overcoming fear, a natural byproduct of stepping into magnetic masculinity?
Yes, it is. And I think, again, the reason that we haven't been celebrating that authenticity is, again, because of fitting in. And we have really done men a disservice in society and humanity of depriving them of that emotional navigation system. And I say we because women raise them. I think we're all in this together. So I think that we heal together and we connect together. And yes, I think that, although here's something else I would say that came to me when you were speaking, and is that I think that there's nothing more painful, and this is through experience, than our own rejecting and disapproval and judgment of ourselves, than the judgment, separation, or pain of not being accepted by others. We confuse that We often think that it's the others rejecting us, but at some point, the pain of rejecting and denying and disowning and disidentifying from our own self and our own authenticity and our own approval and our own compassion, the risk of not being accepted by others seems minuscule in relation to the advantage and the empowerment of authentic alignment and magnetic masculinity. And it's going to take some evolutionary leaders at the front of that curve to acknowledge and give themselves permission to not fit in order to be evolutionary leaders.
Can you talk a little bit more about that idea of mirroring, or we reflect how we're feeling inside out onto the world? And as far as I understand, and this doesn't seem coincidental at all, but as far as I understand, that's what we end up attracting. Is that right?
Yes, so there's different theories about that. We could look at what people commonly refer to as the law of attraction, which I think from a physics perspective makes a lot of sense. So it's that we get back what we put out, that sort of energy entrainment or alignment. We also, I believe, invite into our reality that which promotes our growth, not necessarily what makes us feel good. And we often confuse feeling good with healing in society. And sometimes healing requires getting a little messy. So, what I mean by that is that source, God, the universe, consciousness, whichever metaphor you prefer is perfectly valid, would prioritize healing over getting what we want. So often we attract people into our lives who are the perfect person to poke our wounds so that we know, oh, there's a festering wound under the surface there. How magnificent. Let me heal it. But what it normally looks like is we're like, ow, you're hurting me. Rather than, oh, you've made me aware I have a big giant festering wound here. Now I know what to work on. Thank you. Bless you. So the other layer of that is what I call perceptual filters. And what I mean by that is the thoughts that we think over and over become beliefs or neural pathways. Our beliefs become perceptual filters. So we will perceive our reality in perfect mirroring or reflection to what our subconscious programming is. It's commonly said in self-help that 90 to 95%, and neuroscience, 90 to 95% of our perceptual awareness, the thoughts we think, the words we choose, the habits we create, and the activities we participate in are subconscious. So we can use that mirror in a very helpful, empowering way as a catalyst to make that subconscious conscious, bring it out of the subconscious into the light of our awareness, which empowers us to have more, I want to say control, but I don't think the word control is necessarily a healthy context. It allows us to take these characters out of the subconscious, bring them in here, bring them into what I call the table of our consciousness, so that you as the CEO can understand them a little better, and then they won't need to reflect or project or mirror that in our external reality. So part of it is just software, but part of it is, I think, energetic alignment, and part of it is perceiving what we believe, and that's where that computer software comes in, where we can program things like everything is always working out for me. Like if you, for instance, have a belief in childhood that you're not good enough or that nobody appreciates you, it doesn't matter, and this is proven in studies of the brain now and behavior, that it doesn't matter what happens in your external reality, you will perceive that which your brain believes. So somebody could be showing you 25 times a day that they appreciate you and that they think you're excellent, and the universe could be reflecting to you your excellence, but you're still only going to perceive that person doesn't appreciate me, nobody likes me, and I'm not good enough. And it doesn't matter if you earn $1 million, get 2 PhDs, have a wife, kids, a boat, a vacation home, you're still going to feel like you're not good enough. And you're going to be taking that action, like we talked about earlier. You're going to be taking action from a place of shame, and it's not going to feel fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah. The neurochemical groove, whether it's perceived as positive or negative, especially as we age, widens and deepens, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of challenge, built into that in order to rewire the system for sure. I referenced in the opening, Sandy, that you're on a mission to help 1 million men. That is
Yeah.
a big, hairy, audacious goal.
Yeah, and I have no idea how to achieve it, none. Just if I don't have huge goals, they don't excite me enough to take action. I think that's the ADHD component. So,
Got it.
I need to have I need to have big goals in order to motivate me and excite me. And I think of the trickle effect of when, every one man I help heal helps his partner, his wife, his company, his children. And I think that that's just so exciting, and that ripple effect and how that's going to impact in the collective and help us accelerate that evolutionary excellence or evolving out of the emotional dark ages.
That's really good. Well, you're offering an extraordinary service to men. So, as a man, thank you so much for your work.
Hmm.
Before we
Thank
before
you.
we close, how can listeners learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
Well, they could follow me. I'm a little bit lazy. I'm currently becoming less lazy on social media. So I do have Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Life Strategist Sandy, or I have sandylsmith.com. I just started TikTok last week. That's also Life Strategist Sandy. Or they can always reach out to me at info@sandylsmith.com, and me or my team will get back to them.
Wonderful. I'll be sure to
Yeah.
put the links in the show notes.
Thank you.
Sandy,
And
this
thank
is
you for all the work you're doing. I recognize your position as really a very ideal. Well, again, we don't want to compare ourselves to others, but I acknowledge the work you've done. And I think that you're an excellent model for evolutionary excellence, and that you can contain that confidence and that clarity with vulnerability and emotional mastery. And I think that's really brilliant. And I celebrate you.
yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for your time. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation.
That was fun. I'd love to do it again. There's a lot of things you and I talked about when we met earlier that we didn't even touch on today that would also be really fun.
Yeah, we'll be sure to do it again. Thank you,
Great.
Sandy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Contact the show at itsnotmycredittotake.com. We'd love to hear from you. God bless.